So this morning I want to talk about what I'm calling the spirit of Zazen, of Zazen. And the way I'm defining that this morning is as not striving. Okay. Now that may sound strange because if you've read literature on Zazen, on Zen, you've probably seen all sorts of exhortations to practice hard and put everything, your whole body and mind into your practice, and things like that, which suggest that in fact the way to practice is to strive hard, be unrelenting in your practice. So what I'm going to say today may sound paradoxical, and it may in fact be contrary to what some of my teacher colleagues might say, but I feel clear and strong about it. I think that the single greatest mistake that most Zen practitioners make is to strive. This morning I got up to make my fire as usual. It's not terribly cold this morning, but cold enough to need the fire. And I struggled with that fire for an hour. I did everything that I could think of to get it going. I pumped the bellows so much that I'm going to have forearms like Arnold Schwarzenegger or somebody. And I added more tinder and rearranged the pieces of wood. I did all sorts of things for about an hour. And the fire was barely gasping, just a little tiny flame in one of the corners. So I gave up because it was almost 8 o'clock and we were going to start the retreat. And I thought, well, all right. I mean, it's not uncomfortably cool in here. I've got my blanket in my lap. I'm all set. Well, about 10 minutes later, I glanced over and I could see orange lights dancing in the wood stove. And a half hour later, it was burning brightly. And so I ran over, I threw in a couple of extra pieces of wood and sat back down. And at the end of an hour, the fire was so warm that I was able to shut it down all the way. That the cabin was up to temperature and I didn't want it any warmer. And I thought, there's a good metaphor for non striving. I was convinced that I had to do something to make that fire burn, and I could not figure out what it was. But being allowed to be itself, the fire grew. Fire got hot. And I thought of another metaphor this morning that pertains to non striving. And I think I've talked about this recently. Um, There's an old martial arts story about a young man who goes to a sword master to ask for instruction. And he says, Master, I will try very hard, very hard. How long will it take me to learn your way of the sword? and the master said, oh, 2 years. And the young man said, but I'm going to be even a better student. I'm going to practice all the time. I'm going to try my absolute best. I'm going to, be the best student you ever had. How long will it take me? The teacher said 5 years. Now, the art of swordsmanship is not completely divorced from a parallel to Zazen. Because to be a successful swordsman meant that you had to put aside your ego, had to be entirely engulfed in the practice until you lost yourself. And it would talk about like the sword swinging itself. The swordsman is not present at all. And in the life and death encounters that the swordsman faced, that wasn't just a spiritual principle, it was a practical principle. Because you only had milliseconds to respond in a sword fight. And if you were thinking, if you had your ego involved, it would be over before you even knew what happened. The encounters between, it's not like what you see in the movies. The encounters between adepts with swords were instantaneous, very fast. No room to think, no room to form an ego, no room to be an observer. And therefore, no room to strive. I'll use another example, a little more contemporary example, baseball. Baseballs these days, the pitchers throw the ball somewhere between 85 and 100 miles an hour. Just a little white thing. 85 and 100 miles an hour. If you are thinking about how you're going to respond to that pitch, if you're even taking the time to recognize that pitch as a pitch, the ball is in the catcher's glove before you even swing your bat. That fast. So I assume that one of the things a batting coach teaches a batter is don't strive, don't try, don't think. Be right there, dig your spikes in, and swing. And I think this is what Dogen Zenji called doing, not doing. Doing, not doing. Sounds like one of those Zen gobbledygook terms. Right? What the hell does he mean by that? But what he's calling not doing, I'm calling not striving. There's an action, but the action is not a accompanied by effort, because effort is intention, and intention is ego. Or as Master Yoda said, not try, do. Right? So it is with Zazen. If we're trying to do Zazen, we're not doing Zazen. If we're striving for something, for realization, for egolessness, for any goal, then we're not doing Zazen. Now, this is hard. This flies in the face of what we've been taught our entire lives. We've been taught our entire lives to strive, to make an effort, to do better, to try harder, to run faster, whatever the thing is. That's deeply ingrained in our natures. And so we bring that with us to our practice of Zen. We want to accomplish something. We want to gain something. We want to be something. And yet we're told that there's nothing to gain. And there's no one who gains. That's an illusion. That's a fiction that results from the ego that we're creating. The term shikantaza, which most of you have heard, which is one of our styles of sitting, roughly translates to just sitting. Just sitting. It doesn't say striving to sit perfectly. It doesn't say striving to have no thoughts. It doesn't say striving to let go of the ego. It says just sitting. Just sitting is a profound act and not an easy act. We want to add something more. We want our sitting to be about something. We want to be able to go someplace. We want to achieve something. And we use our observing mind to monitor this, to register this, to kind of like, all right, oh, how's my sitting? And people come sometimes to Iceland and say, oh, my sitting is terrible. Well, it's impossible to have terrible sitting. Now, what I believe people usually mean by that is they've got thoughts popping up. And sometimes we have more thoughts popping up than other times. That doesn't make the sitting terrible. There's no such thing as good sitting or bad sitting. There's only sitting, or as we say in Shikantaza, just sitting. Thoughts are going to do what they want to do. And our job is to not attach to them and continue sitting. Not worry about it. Is my sitting good today? Is my sitting bad today? Doesn't matter. We're sitting with focus. We're paying attention to our practice, whatever our practice is, then it's good sitting. It is action without intention, because intention resides in the ego. As soon as I intend something, I have created an ego-based thought. I am no longer just sitting. I am striving. Now, I noticed that this morning, as you were all sitting, many of you were sitting very, very still. And in fact, I was like, oh, wow, we're not taking any breaks. We're not doing Kinan. And people are like, still, 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 which was interesting to me. First off, I hope that you weren't in a lot of pain because of that. And one of the admonitions for this extended practice is take care of yourself. If you're in pain and you need to move your legs, move your legs. If you need to go to the bathroom, go to the bathroom. The intention of these longer sits is not to inflict discomfort on ourselves, more than a sort of modicum of that. There may be some that's always inherent in sitting, but that's all. There's nothing noble about striving to deal with pain. I used to think there was. I used to put up with a lot of pain. An interesting thing happens when you're in a lot of pain when you're doing zazen. You're no longer focusing on your practice. Your pain becomes your practice. Now, that may not be a bad thing. I think that Zaido used to talk about like a diamond hard edge samadhi, and the way that one got into diamond hard edge samadhi was enduring your way through pain, letting the pain become the focal point of the practice, everything in, and I'm there, and I'm, with the pain. Well, that's an option that's available to you if you would like. Personally, I see nothing ennobling in enduring pain beyond very, very minor amount. Zazen practice does not require discomfort. Again, not everybody shares this opinion, perhaps, but I feel strongly about it. Sit strong and give up intention. Become the practice. Become the zazen. That's all we have to do. Now, perhaps where some of the language around striving comes from is the need to sustain and maintain our practice over the years, which is a different thing. Sometimes people say to me, "Oh, I love sitting. I love Zazen." Well, that's great. And there may also be times when you don't love sitting and you don't love Zazen. Or when you're very busy and it's competing with other priorities in your life. Or when you're physically ill, all kinds of reasons that you might love sitting there. That's where the challenge arises. That's where we need a certain amount of striving to maintain the consistency, to not drift away, to not blow it off, to not say, "Oh, I'll do it tomorrow." One of the things that my teacher, Margaret, taught me that I proved true for me, and I believe it's absolutely true, is that consistency is the most important aspect of our practice. Not duration. If you want to sit for hours, there's nothing wrong with that. Feel free. But what Margaret taught me was if you can only sit 5 minutes, sit. Don't have a day where you don't sit. That's the most important element. That's where the certain amount of striving needs to come in. Because we have all sorts of distractions in our lives. We're tired. You know, maybe we're frustrated. Maybe we're angry. All kinds of things arise. We're very, very busy. Everybody is very, very busy. And it can be very tempting to say, okay, I'll do extra tomorrow. I'm missing today, but I'll sit 12 hours tomorrow. Sit every day. Not, I mean, is it the longer the better? Probably, maybe to a point anyway. But again, it's like, okay, when you practice, you want to be able to fully engage in the practice. And if things are tearing you away to the point where you can no longer focus, where you're feeling guilty then that's not good practice either. Better to practice shorter and be there, not be feeling torn. So strive to practice every day. And practice, not striving. Thank you.
Peter, I was recently reading Pema Chodron, When Things Fall Apart, and I'd read it before, but this time it really struck me because she had a phrase in there, no hope. And I thought, oh, that's horrible. You should always have hope. But I think what it really relates to is this, no striving, no hoping, no try, just do. And it really helped my practice a lot. So thanks.
Yeah, thank you. You know, hope is interesting. Hope is wanting things to be other than they are. It's wanting things to be other than they are. And what we are doing in Zen practice is learning to live with things as they are. And there's a distinction between those two things. If I'm hoping, well, one or two things may happen. What I'm hoping for may happen, and I'm going to be elated, or what I'm hoping for may not happen, and then I will be devastated. Right? I just dropped something. Um, but so I'm putting myself on a little roller coaster, right? And I'm out of the present moment. I'm attaching to something. Hope is an attachment. And depending on how tightly I hold it, I can cling to that hope, right? I can be really devastated if whatever it is doesn't happen. Now, so in Zen, we would say, no, just live the moment, live this right now, right here, and don't worry about the future. We don't know the future. We can't control the future. Eventually, it'll be the present, and then we'll find out. But that can be hard. That can be hard psychologically. We like to have a certain amount of hope. So this is one of these places of sort of a little bit of contradiction between our psychological nature and our nature as Zen sees it. If we're really practicing in a strict sense, then we're not hoping for anything. Oh, the sun stopped, the snow stopped, the sun came out, which it just did. And if we're hoping, we're attaching to an outcome, a result. Now, am I saying we shouldn't hope? No, I'm not saying that. I think sometimes psychologically, as human beings, we want to have some hope. Well, we need to have some hope. But if you ask me in the context of Zen, I would say let it go.
This is a very interesting distinction to me. Like Molly, I've read Pema, and it used to bother me an awful lot about hope. The twin pitfalls, she'd say hope was one of them, and it always bothered me. And it did because I remember a phrase by Khalil Gibran who said, a place where you weep, but not all of your tears, and laugh, but not all of your laughter. And I thought, is that what I'm getting into? Is it an erasure? And I think what is happening here, what you're saying, and what I've concluded is that Zen in being fully present allows you both, rather unalloyed and immediate uh, way.
Well, it allows us to experience deeply with a minimum of attachment. If we go back to the Four Noble Truths of the Buddha, where does suffering arise? Suffering arises because we resist impermanence. Right? That's the most fundamental teaching. Everything is impermanent. Everything wears out, grows old, dies. Everything. Everything changes. So whatever we hold to, whatever we cling to, whatever we desire will cause us suffering. Now, I think the early Buddhists understood that in a much more pure sense than we do now. We have for example, the story of Sewell that Gary likes so well, and it and she's this Zen adept, and she's grieving the death. Is it her grandchild, Gary, that dies? Yeah, she's grieving the death of her grandchild, and everybody is flummoxed. How could this adept woman be crying tears, be upset, be grieving? But grieving is part of life also. When we open ourselves up, we open ourselves to the whole panoply of emotions. They will come and they will go. Sometimes we will like them, and sometimes we will hate them. That's the problem. Avoid picking and choosing. So when the emotion is one of happiness, it's like, oh, I love my emotions. And when the emotion is one of grief or sadness or fear or something, it's like, oh, I don't want these stinking emotions, right? And it's interesting, even from a psychological perspective, it's a package deal. We don't get to pick and choose. When dealing as I do with people in recovery from addictions, when men are in their active addictions and they cut off their emotions, which is fairly typical, the one emotion that remains is anger. When women are in their active addictions and cut off their emotions, the one emotion that remains is sadness. But to restore the emotions, you've got to take the whole package. You can't say, well, I'm not so good on big on sadness, but I'm going to take happiness and love, and no, it's a package deal. Well, the same is true from the Zen perspective in this case. Not picking and choosing. The great way is not difficult. Only avoid picking and choosing. Well, of course, that's silly because it is difficult, because avoiding picking and choosing isn't easy. But that's what we're working on.
Um, I have to sign off at 11:15, so excuse me if I leave before you even finish the answer. But Peter, before I depart, um, you kind of threw a bomb into things to say intent to connect intention with ego. And of course, I understand exactly what you mean, and I agree. It's a thought. Um, but there's so many Zen or Buddhist books on intention. And thinking about your metaphor of the fire, the flame would not have ignited, most likely, if you had done nothing this morning to make preparations. And we are, I think, wisely counseled before beginning sitting to um, take a few breaths, have a quiet place, have some intention about that experience. So, how would you distinguish between intention and preparation?
Well, okay, I'm gonna answer this a couple of ways. First of all, Buddhist books, Buddhist teachers, we're all liars. Okay? We're always stating half the truth because the whole truth can't be stated well. And so everybody, even the great teachers, is hitting the mark someplace and missing the mark someplace. It's the nature of trying to express the Dharma. So that said, hold it all lightly and filter it through your process, through your awareness, and don't take what any teacher says as the gospel. Let's start with that. Yeah, look, you're probably correct, Susan, in that we need to start with a little seed of intention. I mean, if we don't have intention, we're not going to sit down at all, right? We've got to have something that says, okay, I'm going to go do Zazen right now. I'm going to go mow the lawn right now. I'm going to go, and it's not a very good day for lawn mowing. But you get the drift. So, yes, but then we've got to throw that seed out. When we start practicing, when we start sitting, whatever seed was there, we've got to throw it out. Does that make sense?
Yes, and it kind of could be played out in other ways in our life where sometimes we need our egos to accomplish human events. But our practice is helping us to let go when the time is right, maybe.
Look, it can sometimes sound like the ego is a bad thing. The ego is a necessary thing.
Right.
Right? I can't cook myself breakfast without an ego. I can't put my clothes on in the morning. In fact, as you practice and you experience states in which your ego won't be present, that's great, but you're not doing anything. You can't do anything. Right? So you've got to come back into, I've got to be Peter to make breakfast. I've got to be Peter, and so this now gets to, now I haven't talked about the Cheshire Cat in a while. But comes back to the Cheshire Cat. Because it's possible to function at various densities. You all remember the cat. Sometimes the cat is absolutely there, all of the cat's there, and then sometimes just the tail is there, or just the eyes are there, or whatever. The cat can go, disappears and comes back, and so on. And that's really how we function in terms of, trying to think of the right word. Well, in this relationship between intention and ego, and certain acts, like a place where I can maybe explain this a little more clearly. One of the first places that I started to kind of experience, I'm getting on very thin ice here, but a little sort of diminished ego was when I was doing counseling practice. And I realized that if I was listening very intently to the person and to what they were saying, the presence of myself was diminished. And then eventually I sort of learned that that's kind of where I want to be when I'm counseling. I don't want to be fully opaque Peter, and I don't want to be fully transparent nobody, because in one state, it's all about me, and in the other state, I can't function. right? So the thinking about the cat, I got to be kind of in between. And so that movement is happening constantly, depending on context. Okay, sometimes the cat's not there at all. Sometimes the cat's all there. And most of the time, the cat is somewhere in between. That's where we're functioning. Now I've got the question. Did I answer the question?
Yes, I think you did. Exactly.
Cheshire Cat's
Thank you.
very important.
Thank you.
So not many people have read the Cheshire Cat Sutra, but very important aspect of Zen teaching. It comes from Daidaluri. Daidaluri says, Sensei, eventually Roshi, used that image. That's where I stole that image from, but I think it's very appropriate. I don't know where he got it. Maybe he got it from Izumi Roshi. I don't know.
Yes, thank you.
I'd like to add a word of thanks because I'm maybe not as well read as some and maybe more than others, but so many times in reading about Zen, I have literally felt, well, or read, you're doing it all wrong. If you're doing it this way, you're doing it wrong. I'm talking about meditation. If you're doing it this way, you're doing it wrong. You're not getting anywhere. And so it slaps me back. And so what you said now and before is very contrary to that and extremely helpful. That's not the way to approach this, that it's not wasted time, that you're not moving backward, you're not sliding down a sand mountain, nothing like that. And to me, that's extremely refreshing. So anyway, I want to thank you for that.
Oh, of course. Yeah, the
Helpful.
only way it's wasted can be wasted time is to be completely distracted. You know what? There's like a game that people do online where you build a whole city and you get buildings and I don't know what the game is, but if you're doing that while you're in the kitchens, you're probably wasting your time. It just comes back to if it's making a sincere effort, just make a sincere effort and drift away and forget and start thinking about something and come back. That's all. I haven't mentioned this but way back, some people know of Herbert Benson. He was a researcher at Harvard. Back in the 90s, he was sort of well known. And he had something that he researched called the meditation effect. And what he discovered was that meditation effect did not occur when the person was perfectly concentrated, if there's even such a thing, but when they had drifted away, realized it, and come back. That the power of the meditation was realizing that they had drifted away and coming back. It wasn't being perfectly concentrated. Very interesting. And I think that's true. So if that's true, then if you're having a day where you're like more challenged than usual by your zazen and you drift away 1,000 times, if you come back 1,000 times, that may be your best day of practice. And you go, oh, I couldn't focus today. I drifted away so many times. No, just come back. That's the sincerity of the practice. Again, if we're out there building houses and things, well, then I wouldn't call it practice.
I used to think that coming back meant to make an effort with my ego to concentrate on, my breathing or whatever it is, but now I think it's just letting go and then of the ego's concerns, and then the experience just expresses itself.
Yeah, I think that's accurate. But again, back to the metaphor, baseball metaphor, just swing the bat. Right? Just swing the sword. So this is initially in Peter Matheson's voice, and then I think he's expressing teachings that he heard from Maizumi Roshi and Tetsugen Bernie Glassman. In the early days of American Zen practice, much was made of Kensho. Yatsutani, for example, would announce who had an opening at the end of each sesshin. Maizumi does not do this, and neither did Tetsugen when he began to teach. And now this is a quote. Personally, I don't stress openings or talk about them because I don't want to get people to get caught up in that. I think Kensho is essential. It has to happen. And so long as the practice is constant and steady, so long as the student continues to practice without being intent on achieving some special state, something that he or she has heard about, it will. Achieving a special state, not the thing we heard about or read about or any of those things. And I think it mentions that constant and steady, constancy, time. Okay. Anything else on our agenda?
Creations are numberless. I vow to free them. Delusions are inexhaustible. I vow to put an end to them. Reality is boundless. I vow to perceive it. The enlightened way is unsurpassable. I vow to embody it. Creations are numberless. I vow to free them. Delusions are inexhaustible. I vow to put an end to them. Reality is boundless. I vow to perceive it. The enlightened way is unsurpassable. I vow to embody it. Creations are numberless. I vow to free them. Delusions are inexhaustible. I vow to put an end to them. Reality is boundless. I vow to perceive it. The enlightened way is unsurpassable. I vow to embody it.
Everybody enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you.